The Middle East is breaking apart, and a regional war may already be starting. A region once held together by fear, oil, and American guarantees is discovering what happens when all three begin to loosen at once. For decades, the Middle East appeared chaotic only to outsiders. To those who governed it, and those who studied it professionally, it possessed a recognizable structure. Alliances were brittle but legible. Rivalries were intense but bounded. Wars erupted, certainly, yet rarely escaped their assigned theaters. Today that structure is dissolving. Not collapsing dramatically, but peeling apart layer by layer, like old paint exposed to desert heat. The region is no longer divided into camps. It is fragmented into corridors of competition. Violence is no longer episodic. It is becoming systemic. And the most dangerous feature of the emerging order is not who is fighting who, but that fewer actors now control when fighting starts or stops. The Middle East is not sliding back into instability. It is entering a new strategic phase altogether, the disappearance of the old map. For most of the modern era, the region's conflicts could be plotted on a simple chart. On one axis stood Israel and its adversaries. On another stood Iran and the Arab monarchies. Overlaying both was the stabilizing geometry of American power, naval fleets, air bases, and security guarantees that discouraged escalation even while enabling confrontation. This arrangement never produced peace. But it produced predictability. Today predictability is what is disappearing. Saudi Arabia speaks to Iran even as both hedge against each other. Turkey bargains simultaneously with Russia, NATO, and Gulf states. Israel conducts military campaigns without waiting for Western diplomatic choreography. Smaller states, from Qatar to the United Arab Emirates, behave less like clients and more like venture capitalists of regional influence, investing selectively in crises where returns appear plausible. The result is not an alliance breakdown. It is alliance liquidity, and liquidity, in geopolitics, is rarely stabilizing, the quiet retreat that changed everything. The transformation began not in Riyadh, Tehran, or Jerusalem, but in Washington. America has not withdrawn from the Middle East. Its bases remain. Its fleets still patrol choke points. Its aircraft still strike when necessary. Yet its strategic posture has shifted from management to mitigation. Instead of shaping outcomes, it increasingly limits consequences. For regional actors long accustomed to American arbitration, this shift is profound. Security guarantees once assumed to be permanent now appear negotiable. Intervention once expected now appears conditional. The effect has been subtle but unmistakable. States no longer align. They hedge. Saudi Arabia explores détente with Iran. Gulf monarchies deepen economic ties with China. Turkey experiments with strategic autonomy. Israel prepares for campaigns that may proceed with or without American enthusiasm. None of these moves constitute rebellion against Washington. They are adjustments to uncertainty. Iran's strategy, deterrence by dispersion. Among the region's major powers, Iran has adapted most coherently to this unique environment. Rather than pursuing traditional military parity with its rivals, it has invested in what might be called deterrence by geography. Influence now stretches not through alliances but through corridors. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and maritime approaches to the Red Sea. This network does not function as a rigid command structure. It operates more like an ecosystem. Local actors pursue local agendas, yet together they create strategic depth that complicates any attempt to confront Tehran directly. The advantage of such a system is resilience. The disadvantage is volatility. Because once escalation authority disperses, escalation discipline weakens with it. Militias rarely read diplomatic signaling with the same caution as states. Israel's strategic impatience. Israel, meanwhile, has reached the opposite conclusion. If deterrence cannot be guaranteed by allies, it must be enforced preemptively. If threats cannot be contained at borders, they must be disrupted at their sources. The result has been a shift from reactive defense to initiative-taking interference across multiple theaters simultaneously. Strikes in Syria, shadow conflict with Iran, confrontation with armed groups in Gaza and pressure along the Lebanese frontier all reflect a doctrine built on forward disruption rather than territorial defense. Such a strategy can succeed tactically for extended periods. Strategically, however, it accumulates friction. The more fronts a state manages at once, the greater the probability that one refuses to remain limited. The Gulf's experiment with independence, the most revealing transformation is occurring in the Arab Gulf. For half a century the monarchies there outsourced security while concentrating on prosperity. Today they are attempting something more ambitious: autonomy without isolation. They normalize relations selectively. They invest in diplomacy with rivals. They diversify arms suppliers. They mediate conflicts rather than merely funding them. Saudi Arabia's dialogue with Iran is not reconciliation. It is risk management. The United Arab Emirates' outreach to multiple global partners is not neutrality. It is strategic insurance. These states are not leaving the American orbit. They are ensuring they can survive if its gravitational pull weakens. It is a rational adjustment. It is also a destabilizing one, because regions stabilized by a single guarantor rarely transition smoothly into multipolar systems. Turkey's return as a corridor power, Turkey, long suspended between Europe and the Middle East, has quietly resumed its historical role as a corridor state, connecting, obstructing, and arbitraging simultaneously. Its military footprint in northern Syria, diplomatic bargaining with Russia, transactional ties with Gulf states and selective cooperation with NATO illustrate a foreign policy designed less around alignment than leverage. Turkey does not seek dominance. It seeks maneuverability, and maneuverability, in crowded strategic environments, often produces unintended collisions. The militias that became actors. The region's most underestimated transformation is the elevation of non-state forces from instruments to participants. Militia networks once served as extensions of state power. Increasingly they behave as semi-independent strategic actors. Their decisions reflect ideological commitments, local rivalries, and battlefield incentives as much as instructions from sponsors. This matters enormously, because when escalation authority decentralizes, crises multiply faster than diplomacy can contain them. An attack on shipping lanes, a rocket exchange across a frontier, a drone strike on infrastructure. Each incident may appear tactical. Collectively they create strategic momentum. Momentum, once established, is difficult to reverse. The Red Sea becomes a front line. Nowhere is the transformation more visible than along the Red Sea. For decades it functioned primarily as a trade artery. Today it increasingly resembles a pressure point. Maritime routes once assumed to be secure now require escorts. Insurance markets adjust faster than diplomats can respond. Regional actors recognize that disrupting shipping produces global leverage at comparatively low cost. The geography of conflict is expanding faster than its participants expected. What begins as a regional confrontation increasingly carries international economic consequences. The illusion of contained wars. The most persistent assumption about Middle Eastern conflict is that it stays containable. History offers mixed evidence. Wars in the region often begin locally. They rarely stay so indefinitely. The mechanisms of escalation are subtle: alliance obligations, ideological commitments, domestic legitimacy pressures, and misread signaling accumulate until restraint becomes politically impossible. Today those mechanisms are multiplying simultaneously. A clash along the Lebanese frontier risks activating Syrian corridors. A maritime incident risks drawing in naval coalitions. A strike on energy infrastructure risks triggering global responses. The architecture of containment is weakening precisely as the number of triggers increases. A region without referees. The defining feature of the emerging Middle Eastern order is not rivalry. The region has always known about rivalry. It is the absence of a referee. External powers still influence events, but none now impose discipline across the system. America stays present but selective. Russia is still active but constrained. China is still interested but cautious. Regional actors increasingly run under the assumption that crises will not be externally resolved. This encourages experimentation, and experimentation, in geopolitics, often produces surprises. The paradox of diplomacy amid escalation. Curiously, this fragmentation has coincided with an increase in diplomatic activity. States speak more often than before. Mediation initiatives multiply. Normalization agreements expand cautiously. Negotiations continue even as confrontations intensify. This is not a contradiction. It is an adaptation. In unstable systems, diplomacy becomes insurance rather than resolution. Actors negotiate not because peace is imminent, but because uncertainty is expensive. The danger of simultaneous crises. The Middle East has experienced large wars before. It has experienced proxy wars before. It has experienced maritime disruptions before. What it has not experienced recently is all three at once across multiple theaters without a stabilizing superpower framework. That combination is new. It produces a strategic environment in which escalation need not be intentional to become irreversible. A miscalculation in one theater now travels faster across the region's political geography than at any time in decades. Conflicts no longer remain local long enough to be managed locally. The shape of what comes next, the region is unlikely to descend into a single decisive war. That would require coordination it currently lacks. Instead, it is drifting towards something subtler and potentially more dangerous, overlapping limited wars that gradually merge into a wider confrontation no one explicitly chose. This is how regional systems transform, not through declarations, but through accumulation. Shipping disruptions become routine. Border exchanges become normalized. Proxy attacks become background noise. Diplomatic hedging becomes permanent posture. Eventually what once appeared exceptional begins to look like order. The Middle East is not collapsing into chaos. It is reorganizing into a competitive mosaic in which power is diffused, alliances provisional and escalation increasingly difficult to control. Such systems can endure for years. They rarely are still quiet.